My name is Victor Cage. I am 35 years old. I'm a civil engineer. I build things for a living, bridges, foundations, load-bearing structures. I have spent my entire career learning one truth. The thing that destroys a structure is never the thing you can see. It is always the thing buried underneath. I know that now. I didn't know it on the morning I zipped my wife's suitcase and smelled another man's cologne rising off a dress she had folded neatly between her things like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. I didn't divorce my wife. What I did was so much worse. And she knew it the moment she saw the moving truck parked outside her sister's apartment. But I'll get to that. First, I need you to understand how we got there. Because none of it started with a moving truck. It started with a bag, a dress, and a smell that crawled into the back of my throat and never fully left. Sonia had asked me to help pack. She was running late. She was always running late. And she came into the bedroom in that specific way she had, the way that meant she needed something but wasn't going to ask for it directly. She tilted her head, bit the corner of her lip, said, "Babe, can you zip me up? I still need to blow dry." And I did. Because that's what I did. That's what I had always done. I was folding her going-out dress, the black one, the backless one she wore to her company dinner 2 years ago and looked so beautiful I'd taken a photo of her in the parking lot just to have it. When it hit me. Not strong, not like a punch, more like a whisper. Something warm and woody and completely wrong. A cologne I didn't own. A scent that had no business being in our bedroom, on our bed, folded inside our luggage. I stood there for a moment. Just one moment. I pressed the fabric between my fingers and I breathed it again to make sure I wasn't constructing something out of nothing. I wasn't. I zipped the bag. I carried it to the front door. I kissed her forehead when she came downstairs. I watched her reverse out of the driveway, window down, sunglasses on, waving at me like everything in the world was fine. And then I went back inside, walked to our bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed and stayed there for 11 minutes without moving. I want you to understand something about me before we go any further. I'm not a paranoid man. I'm not a controlling man. I am the son of a man who watched his wife unravel their marriage thread by thread and called it peace because he refused to pull. I swore I would never be him. But sitting on that bed, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know which direction not being him pointed anymore. Did it mean I confront what I smelled? Or did it mean I was already too late? I am not a man who checks his wife's location. I want to be clear about that because I need you to understand what it cost me to open that app. 7 years of marriage, and I had never once opened Find My with anything other than a practical reason. Finding a misplaced phone, confirming she'd landed safely on a work trip. Never surveillance. Never suspicion. That was a line I'd drawn for myself early in our marriage, and I'd held it like a professional, like a man who trusted his wife, like my father had trusted his. And we both know how that ended for my father. Sonia called me at 8 p.m. on the first night of the trip. She sounded warm, a little tired, happy in that light way she sometimes got when she'd had one glass of wine and was feeling generous with herself. She said the hotel was beautiful. She said Linda had already found a rooftop pool. She said, "I miss you a little," and laughed like that was a funny thing to admit. I told her I missed her too. I told her to have fun. I meant both of those things completely. I locked my phone and ordered food and watched 40 minutes of something I couldn't tell you the name of now. Then I unlocked my phone again. Not to check on her. I told myself I was just looking at the weather. I opened Find My. The blue dot sat perfectly still on the Merritt on Brickell Avenue. I stared at it for longer than a reasonable man would stare at a stationary dot. Then I locked the phone, set it face down, and told myself that was the end of it. The smell in the dress was nothing. The dot was at the hotel. Everything was fine. I was my father's son, and my father's son needed to be smarter than his father. I fell asleep with the television on. At midnight, something woke me. Not a sound. Not a nightmare. Just that particular stillness that sometimes pulls you out of sleep when something is wrong, and your body knows before your mind catches up. I reached for my phone. Told myself I was checking the time. I opened Find My. The blue dot was gone from the Merritt. I sat up, refreshed, waited. It loaded. And the dot was sitting on an address I didn't recognize. Not a hotel name. Not a landmark. Just a building on a street I had never heard Sonia mention. I took a screenshot. I don't know why. My thumb just moved. I stayed at that address until the screen dimmed. Then her name lit up my phone. She was calling me. 4 to 7 seconds after I'd taken the screenshot, as if the universe wanted to see how well I could perform. I answered on the second ring. My voice came out completely normal. "Hey, you still up?" She laughed softly. "Couldn't sleep. Just wanted to hear your voice." I said, "I'm glad you called." And I meant that too. I meant it the way a man means something when he is standing at the edge of a very high place and someone he loves has just held out their hand, not knowing they are also the reason he is standing there. We talked for 9 minutes. I said nothing about the dot. She said nothing about where she actually was. We said goodnight like two people in a perfectly healthy marriage. I hung up, opened the screenshot, stayed at the address. Then I put the phone face down again, lay back in our bed, in the dark, and I made myself a promise that I immediately broke by not sleeping for the rest of the night. I was at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon when Linda's name appeared on my phone. Linda never called me directly. We were cordial in the way that people are cordial when they tolerate each other for the sake of someone they both love. So when her name came up, my first thought was that something had happened to Sonia. I answered fast. Nobody spoke. The call was an accident. Her phone had dialed from her pocket or her bag. And for a moment all I heard was music, a bass-heavy kind of music, and glasses clinking, and laughter that belonged to a room I had never been in. I almost hung up. I should have hung up. Then I heard Sonia's voice. Not the Sonia who called me at midnight to say she wanted to hear my voice. A different Sonia. Looser, lighter, unguarded in a way she had not been with me in longer than I wanted to calculate. She was mid-sentence when the call connected, and she said, laughing, "No, stop." He would never even think to check. A man's voice said something I couldn't fully make out. And then Sonia said, in a tone I can only describe as the tone of a woman who has completely forgotten she is married, "Tonight was different. You're different." The call cut. 4 to 5 seconds. That was all. I set the phone down on my desk and looked at it for a long time. My assistant knocked and opened the door and said, "Victor, the 3 o'clock is ready for you." I said, "Close the door." She did. I sat in that office with 4 to 5 seconds of audio on a loop in my head, and I thought about my father, and I thought about peace, and I thought, this is what peace costs. She came home on a Friday. Bruno heard the car before I did. He scrambled off the couch and posted himself at the front door the way he always did when Sonia came home. Tail destroying the air, nose pressed to the gap at the bottom of the door, completely unreasonable with excitement. She was his person. She had picked him from the shelter herself. He had slept on her side of the bed the entire 4 days she was gone. The door opened. Sonia stepped in, rolling her suitcase, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, and she moved past Bruno like he was furniture. A slight sidestep. No bend down, no baby talk, no the greeting ritual they had performed every single day for 3 years without fail. Bruno turned and looked at me. I know how that sounds. But I'm telling you, the dog looked at me with something in his eyes that I recognized because I was feeling it too. She went straight upstairs. Didn't drop her bag. Didn't kick off her shoes at the door the way she always did, leaving them for me to trip over and complain about. Straight up the stairs, and I heard the shower running before I'd even fully processed that she hadn't said anything beyond, "Hey, I'm exhausted." 40 minutes. I stood in the kitchen and I cooked because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I made her favorite, jerk chicken pasta, the recipe I'd spent 3 attempts perfecting because she'd mentioned once, casually, that she missed it. She came downstairs warm, glowing, calling me babe 3 times in 2 sentences, kissing my jaw, commenting on the food. She ate 4 bites. She didn't notice that I counted. I had never used her iCloud password with bad intentions. She'd given it to me voluntarily, a Saturday afternoon 2 years ago when her phone was full and she couldn't figure out how to free up storage. She'd read it aloud from her notes app and I typed it in and fixed the problem, and that was it. I hadn't thought about it since. I thought about it now. I sat at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning while she was at a client meeting, and I opened Hey iCloud from my laptop with my coffee going cold beside me and my hands completely steady in the way that hands get steady when the decision has already been made and the emotions are running just slightly behind. The photos loaded. I went to recently deleted. 1 photo. Sonia at a rooftop. City lights behind her. Her head tilted back in full laughter, the real kind, the unself-conscious kind she used to give me in our first year. And around her shoulders, not Linda's arm, not any female arm, a man's arm. Thick, tattoo to the wrist, comfortable in the way that arms are comfortable when they have been there before. I looked at that photo for 4 minutes. Then I printed it on the home printer and set it face down on the kitchen counter and went about my day. Sunday morning. Breakfast. I made coffee and eggs and set everything out like a normal husband on a normal morning. Sonia came downstairs in her robe, sat across from me, reached for her mug. I waited until she had taken her first sip. Then I slid the photo across the table, between her coffee and her toast, and I looked at her and said, "How was the trip?" She said, "Relaxing." Then she saw the photo, and the word that came out of her was not a word at all. She sat across from me with the photo between us and her mouth opening and closing like she was searching a room she already knew was empty. That's not what it looks like. 5 words. The most useless 5 words in the English language. I didn't raise my voice. I had decided I wouldn't raise my voice. I said, "Then tell me what it looks like, Sonia." She was still searching for the sentence when her phone buzzed on the table. Linda's name on the screen. I looked at it. Looked at her. I picked it up before she could move, and I answered it. Linda started talking immediately, fast, slightly breathless, the voice of someone who had been waiting to unload. "Did you tell him yet? Because Marcus saw you too at the..." She stopped. The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites things. "Tell me what, Linda?" I said, "Nothing." Then a sound that might have been her breath or might have been the beginning of a word she decided not to finish. Then, "Victor." I hung up. I set the phone back on the table face down. Sonia was staring at me with an expression I had never seen on her face in 7 years. Not guilt exactly. Something beyond guilt. The look of a person who has been running and has just realized the thing they were running from was already at the destination. Waiting, sitting calmly with a coffee and a printed photograph. "Who is Marcus?" I said. Her eyes filled. She shook her head. "Sonia." I kept my voice even. "Who is Marcus?" She pressed her hands flat on the table. She was steadying herself. And in that motion, in that small, terrified gesture, I understood that the answer to my question was not going to be a stranger's name. I need to take you back 2 days before that breakfast table. Because Sonia was already carrying something when she walked through that front door. She already knew. She had gone in on a Thursday morning, alone, telling me she had a dentist appointment. Routine, she'd said. She was in and out of the house in 12 minutes, which is not enough time for a dentist, but is exactly enough time for a woman who has already scheduled something she cannot name out loud. The waiting room was cold. She sat with a magazine she did not read. When the doctor came back into the room, he closed the door behind him. That's the detail I keep returning to. The closing of the door. There is a specific, terrible etiquette to bad news. The chair pulled close, the folder placed down gently, the sentence that begins with "so your results," and then pauses for just 1 beat too long. Sonia told me this later, in pieces, on a night when we had moved past performing and into something raw. She said she stared at the wall behind the doctor's head while he spoke. She said her hands found the edge of the exam table and gripped it. She said the strangest thing that happened was that she didn't cry. She just went very still and very cold, and when the doctor asked if she had any questions, she said no and stood up and left. She drove home, made lunch, called Linda. I don't know what they said. I only know that Linda's response, whatever it was not "you need to tell Victor." Because Sonia came home that Friday and sidestepped our dog and stood in our shower for 40 minutes and said nothing. She had 4 days to tell me. She used them to learn how to look me in the eyes. The photo was still on the table between us. Sonia had stopped trying to explain it. She was sitting with her hands in her lap now, and there was a particular quality to her stillness that I recognized as the stillness that comes just before something irreversible. I had seen it in structures, that last moment before a thing that cannot hold its weight finally admits what it is. She said, "It wasn't random, Victor." I waited. It wasn't a stranger. I set my coffee down, slowly, because I needed my hands to have something deliberate to do. "You know him," she said. "You've met him." I looked at her. She looked back at me, and I watched her make the decision to say the name. Watched it move through her, the resignation, the surrender, the terrible relief of a secret that has finally gotten too heavy. Her lips parted. She said the name. The audio of this story drops here because some things I am not yet ready to say out loud in this format. What I will tell you is what happened to my face when I heard it, which Sonia described to me later as the most frightening thing she had ever witnessed. Not because I raged, not because I broke anything, but because I went somewhere else entirely. Behind my eyes, somewhere she couldn't follow. She said it was like watching a building's lights go out floor by floor. I knew this man's handshake. I had sat across a dinner table from him. I had laughed at something he said once, genuinely, and thought afterward that he was decent company. I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip, set it back down. How long? I said. I gave Sonia an hour. I told her I needed to make a call, and I went to the living room, and I stood at the window with my back to her, and I found Linda's name, and I pressed call, and I listened to it ring. She answered on the fourth ring with my name in her voice like a question and a warning folded together. I didn't introduce what I was about to ask. I didn't soften it. I simply said, Linda, did you know he was infected before you took my wife to him? I have delivered difficult news in my professional life. I have stood in rooms and told clients that their foundations were compromised, that what they had built was unsalvageable, that the ground beneath them had never been what they thought it was. I know the sound of a person absorbing something they cannot argue with. The silence that came from Linda's end of that phone was that sound. It lasted long enough that I actually pulled the phone away from my ear to confirm the call was still connected. It was. Victor, I hung up. I stood at the window, and I organized what I now knew into a sequence, the way I organize structural problems, linearly, without emotion, one load-bearing fact at a time. Sonia had cheated. The man had given her an STD. Linda had received a warning about this man weeks before the trip. Linda had said nothing. Linda had booked the trip anyway. Linda had handed her sister, her own sister, to a man she had been warned about and called it a girls' weekend. I filed that sequence away. Then I went back to the kitchen, and I sat across from my wife, and I said, I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning. She came to me on a Monday. I was at the kitchen counter with my laptop open and my third coffee of the morning, and she came in holding a folded piece of paper in both hands like it had weight beyond its paper, which I suppose it did. She set it on the counter in front of me. I looked at it, looked at her, unfolded it. It was a medical document. From her doctor's office. Standard formatting, her name at the top, the diagnosis in the clinical language that makes devastating things sound administrative. And near the bottom, in a section marked Recommended Contact Notification, was my name. Circled in pen. Her pen. She had circled it herself. I looked at my name circled on that paper for a long time. You need to go in, she said. Her voice was stripped of everything. Performance, defense, apology. It was just a fact delivered by a woman who had run out of ways to dress facts up. I'm so sorry, Victor. You need to get tested. I folded the paper, set it on the counter. I did not throw it. I did not raise my voice. I looked at her standing in our kitchen in the morning light, the woman I had proposed to in a hospital corridor while she was grieving a baby we had lost together, the woman I had spent 7 years building a life with the way I built everything. Carefully, load by load, with full belief in the foundation. And I understood in that moment that this was no longer just a story about betrayal. She hadn't just broken our vows. She had brought the consequence home. Set it on the counter. Circle my name. I picked up my keys. I said, I'll call the clinic. Priya came without calling first. She rang the doorbell on a Wednesday evening, and when I opened the door, she looked like someone who had been rehearsing a version of this moment and had just thrown the rehearsal away. She said, I need you to hear something. I don't want to show you this, but I think you need to hear it. I let her in. I made no offer of tea or small talk. We stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen with the counter where Sonia's medical document had been folded and taken away, and Priya took out her phone with the careful movements of a person handling something they wish they'd never been handed. She pressed play. It was a voice note. Timestamp 2:14 a.m. from the third night of the girls' trip. Sonia's voice, unmistakably hers, loosened by alcohol, completely unguarded, filled the kitchen. And for the next 90 seconds, I heard my wife describe, with enthusiasm and detail and the kind of easy laughter that tells you a person is somewhere they have chosen to be, an evening I was not part of, a man whose name I now knew, experiences she had clearly relived enough times to narrate fluently. I listened to all of it. When it ended, I said, "Thank you, Priya." She looked at me like she was waiting for something to break open. Nothing did. I walked her to the front door. She paused on the step and said, "I told her to come home." That night, I told her. "I know," I said. "That matters." I closed the door, came back to the kitchen, opened the drawer next to the refrigerator, the one where we kept takeout menus, expired coupons, things without a proper home. At the back of it was a business card. My attorney's. I had put it there 8 months ago for a property matter and never removed it. I set it on the counter. I didn't call that night, but I looked at it for a long time. I did not divorce my wife. Not immediately. Not in the way people expect. The screaming, the dramatic exit, the papers thrown across a room. What I did was quieter and permanent. I spent 3 days making calls. Not emotional calls, transactional ones. My attorney, my financial advisor, the bank. I documented everything I needed to document with the precision of a man who builds things for a living and therefore understands that demolition, done correctly, is just construction in reverse. The joint accounts were restructured. The mortgage, which had been held under terms that Sonia had never fully read, because I had always handled the paperwork, because she had always trusted me to handle the paperwork, was exited in a way that left me whole and left her responsible for refinancing a loan within 60 days. None of this was illegal. None of it was even cruel. Technically, it was simply the application of information she had given me by underestimating my attention to detail. Then I called Linda. Not to argue. I called her to inform her, in a single sentence, that the LLC, which had been silently guaranteeing her apartment lease, a favor I had extended 3 years ago when her divorce left her financially exposed, a favor she had never fully acknowledged and Sonia had never known the full details of, was formally withdrawing as guarantor effective immediately, which triggered a vacancy clause in the lease that her landlord had every legal right to act on. The moving truck appeared outside Linda's building 4 days later. Sonia called me screaming. I answered. I let her finish. Then I said, "You brought something home to me, Sonia. I'm just returning the favor." I hung up, got in my car, drove to the clinic parking lot and sat in silence, phone face up on my thigh, waiting for the notification that would tell me what my body was carrying now because of choices she had made. My father used to say that a man who trusts his wife is a man at peace. I sat in that parking lot and I thought, maybe peace was never the point. The notification came.